Hello guys, welcome to the Pearson series. So today we will be continuing our refractive errors from chapter number 6. So last time we were discussing about the retinoscopies, keratometries and various procedures. So today we'll be doing after that. They are talking about the near vision now. So let's see what they are saying in near vision. The correction of the near vision, as you know that this you usually do after the correction of the distance vision. So the correction of the near vision should be proceeded by the determination of the near point with the distance correction in place. So it is very important that before giving the near correction, the patient should be fully corrected for the distance vision. Otherwise, the patient will not be able to give you the right and the most accurate near vision correction. So always make a point, make the person 6/6 for the distance before you give the near vision. For this purpose, appropriate test types. So we have got certain appropriate test types which are for your near vision itself. Snellen reading test types. So as we were having the Snellen's chart for the distance vision, similarly we have got the Snellen's chart test types for the near vision also. These were constructed on the same principle as the distance types and therefore they are theoretically very accurate. As far as visual acuity is concerned, the Snellen's chart is very accurate, not only for the distance correction but also for the near correction, but yes, it is very time consuming. So what is happening? Ordinary types we are using, they are more legible and they are easily obtained also. Therefore, you will notice this that in near vision usually we are not using the Snellen's chart, but actually it is there and it is very accurate. So in the near ones, what we are using is the Jagger. He introduced a series of test types in print such that was in common use a century ago and so closely in size to that of the Snellen's so as to be sufficiently accurate for the practical purposes. So Jagger came with the option that he devised these near vision test types which were quite accurate. They were quite similar to that of the Snellen's chart, but they are easily available also. So nowadays we are using those test types. These are widely used and they are available in the different sizes, like we have J1, J2, etc. Then a similar one is also standardized by the Faculty of Ophthalmologists, London, and they are actually numbering it from N5 to N48 corresponding to the modern times Roman in various sizes, and they are also numbered from 5 to 48. So basically we are using the Jaguar test types, but we also have available Snellen's one. We also have this N5 one which is from the Faculty of Ophthalmologists. The patient is given the reading test types and asked to hold them at a distance at which he is accustomed to work or read. Now again a very important thing. See, every person is not accustomed to read at a very standard point. So there can be some variations at which the person is reading or doing his near work according to his height, according to the posture, according to the convenience. So you have to ask the patient to hold these test types at his point where he likes to and he's comfortable reading there. Okay, when they are not distinctly seen, then we are adding the convex lenses. Then you have to add the appropriate convex lenses to the distance correction so that the near point is brought within the working distance and the types are easily and comfortable read. So the position of the near point, I telling you, we are discussing this from the very beginning, that when we give the near vision correction, the near vision, this near point is very important. You must take this into consideration that the position of near point should be very accurate and it should be determined before you are proceeding. So we have determined this position of the near point. This is most accurately done by approximating to the eye a card on which there is a fine line 0.2 mm in breadth or width until the line appears blurred. So how we can actually determine this distance of the near point? So they have told you a very simple method. We can use a card. So we are using a card on which a fine line is drawn. How much fine it is? It's very fine. It is just 0.2 mm in the width, and you have to bring it in the position until and unless it is appearing blurred. So you have to again take it back where it is appearing as one, that is the near point. For practical purposes, it is sufficient to use the smallest test type and move it towards the eye until it can no longer be easily read. Now, many a times we do not have the time for doing all this, taking a card, drawing a line. So what you can do, take the smallest test types that are visible and bring it near the eye. So you have to bring it till they are appearing double or they are becoming invisible. Person is not able to read them. So again, take it back where the again patient is able to read them, and that will become the position of the near point. Distance of the near point from the eye is then measured, and when you are measuring it, you are measuring it in millimeter, mm you have to measure. The range of accommodation is reduced from the formula A is equal to P minus R. So the thing that is called as range of accommodation, or it is called as amplitude of accommodation. You have got some numericals also based on this. They are giving you some numericals how to calculate this amplitude of accommodation. So this is actually your A is equal to P minus R. So you have to deduce the distance point, that is the position of the distance vision from the position of the near point. So you have to deduce that. The correction given should be such that the amplitude of accommodation, that is about 1/3, is kept in reserve. So you have to give this correction in such a way that still the person has some amount of accommodation. You don't have to make him use whole lot of accommodation. Some part is always kept reserve, and what is that part? It is approximately 1/3. Okay. Now we come to the presbyopic correction. Now as you know, we had discussed in the last series also that we have certain dictums for giving this refraction. Whenever you are giving a correction, you have to always keep this in mind that if the patient is having the myopia, then it is preferably undercorrected. It is always preferably undercorrected. If the patient is having hypermetropia, then it is fully corrected. So whenever you are treating the refractive errors, always keep these things in mind. They are very, very important dictums. Similarly, the third dictum is for the presbyopia. Now, as far as the presbyopia is concerned, you always have to remember that it is never overcorrected. It should never be overcorrected. So if you are taking these dictums into consideration and if you are going with these lines, it will become very, very easy for you to give the correction. So presbyopic spectacles should never be prescribed mechanically by ordering an approximate addition varying with the age of the patient. Now, what is the reason? Though we read this that presbyopia can be corrected by two methods. We have got two methods actually. One is your the standard correction. According to the age, we are giving this correction, and second is by actually calculation we are doing. But what they are saying that it should never be prescribed mechanically but by just ordering it according to the age, because we always have a fear that this will end up in doing the overcorrection of presbyopia, and we should never overcorrect it. Okay, so they are saying that each patient should be tested individually, for the individual variation is large, and those lenses ordered which gives the most serviceable and comfortable, not necessarily the clearest vision for the particular work, should be intended. So don't go for the clearest of vision, because obviously what type of glasses you are giving, what kind of lenses you are giving for the presbyopia are the convex ones. So if I am giving +1, okay, and patient is able to see, obviously if I will give +2, then the patient will be able to see clearer. So you have to give the lowest power at which the person is able to work normally and is comfortable in doing the near work. We don't have to go for the clearest of vision, because it should never be overcorrected. So this has to be kept in mind. In all the cases, it is better to undercorrect. It is better to undercorrect than to overcorrect, because if the spectacles tend to be very strong. If you are overcorrecting them, difficulties will be experienced with the convergence, and ultimately the range of vision will be limited. So always keep these things in mind. In any cases, lenses which bring the near point closer than 28 centimeter are rarely well tolerated. So in this respect, there is a general observation that those lenses which you are giving, okay, which are giving you correction closer than 28 centimeter, if you are correcting them um, for closer than 28 centimeter, they are not well tolerated, because this will give you a total power of 3.5 diopter. So they are rarely well tolerated, and if for any reason the demands of fine work require a higher correction, the convergence should be aided with the prisms as well as accommodation with the spheres. So you will say, but this is not a very big number, like 3.5 diopters could be there, but it is seen that it is not very well tolerated. So there is a solution for this. If you are giving the power of 3.5 or something like this, so what we can do is that we can aid it with the help of prisms, and accommodation you can do with the help of spheres. So if you are using this combination of convex lenses with the spheres and the prism both, then we can expect the better tolerability. Generally, both eyes require equal presbyopic or near adhesion, but there are exceptions, like we have unilateral aphakia, unilateral pseudophakia, or unilateral AD's pupil with the paralysis of accommodation in the affected eye. Now this is something unique, because usually this is the first thought that comes to our mind, that near correction will be equal in both the eyes. By reflex we will say that yes, it will be equal, but there are certain exceptions where you will not get equal correction even for the near vision. If the patient has unilateral affected with aphakia or pseudophakia, or if you have the AD stonic pupil, you know that AD stonic pupil may there is a usually the viral ganglionitis, and that is affecting only one side. This is very different from the Arjoll-Robertson pupil, where both the eyes are affected. So you have to be very careful that here only one eye is affected. All right. Now we start with the refractive errors of the eye. So refractive errors of the eye, these are the most common cause of low vision in India. So whenever we talk about blindness, whenever we talk about the low vision, an important thing that remains in our mind is your refractive errors. So before going into the detail of refractive errors, they have tried to explain what is emetropia. So what is emetropia? Emetropia is a condition in which there is an absence of any refractive error. You have perfect state of refraction. You do not have any refractive error, and the parallel beam of light are coming to a focus on the retina. Now when we say that there is no refractive error and the refraction is perfect, what do you mean by that? That simply means that the parallel beam of light, which is expected to come from infinity with accommodation at rest. Now this is again very important. The patient should not use the accommodation, only then I will consider that the refractive status is normal. So if the parallel beam of light which is coming from the infinity with the accommodation at rest, and they are focused exactly at the retina, then I will say the eye is emetropic. At birth, we know that the average axial length is 18 mm. So there are certain changes. The eye at birth that we read, there are certain changes. Now don't get panicky by these values, because these values are slightly varying in every book. So there is always a range there. Okay, so at birth they are saying that the axial length is 18 mm, the cornea is more curved, and anterior chamber is slightly shallow. So this is an important information. Overall, you know that the eye is hypermetropic at the time of birth. So this is the, the blunt truth of the life, that the person is not emetropic at the time of birth. All the babies are hypermetropic. And how much hypermetropia it was there? It was about plus 2 to plus 3 diopter. All the babies are having some degree of hypermetropia, approximately plus 2 to plus 3 diopters. And by the time, there is a growth in the eyeball, because baby is small. So we have all the organs which are small, slowly and gradually they are growing, and when the eyeball will reach the adult size slowly and gradually, the hypermetropia will also shift towards the emetropia. So the degree of hypermetropia may vary, but slightly steep cornea compensates to some extent for the shorter axial length. But you know, because the baby has hypermetropia and we need some kind of compensation for this, they have given you the steep cornea. So obviously it is not compensating for a whole lot of hypermetropia, but some amount of hypermetropia can be compensated because we have given more curvature in the cornea there. The infant eye undergoes rapid growth in the first few years of life to reach the axial length of 23 mm by the age of 3 years. So by the age of 3 years, it is actually compensating a lot. It started with +2 to +3 diopters hypermetropia with the 18 mm, with the 18 mm of axial length, and very slowly it is reaching to 23 mm by the age of 3 years. The cornea becomes now flatter and the anterior chamber deepens and the degree of hypermetropia gradually reducing. So I think they have made some changes here in the axial length also. Now they are saying that the axial length is 18 mm at birth, and by the age of 3 years it is reaching 23 mm. It is reaching 23 mm, and you know, in the adults we have 23, 23.5 and 24. So it is still to cover one more mm, but a lot many changes occur in the first 3 years. From 18 mm it is reaching to 23 mm. The convex cornea that was much steeper, that is also becoming flatter, and the baby is shifting from the hypermetropia towards the emetropia. Now if you see the second shift, that is your between 3 to 14 years of age. Now still you have growth. So here the axial length is increasing further by 1 mm. That is what I was telling you, because ultimately it has to reach 24 mm, and now the curvature of the lens is also increasing, the power of the lens is also changing, and now you will have the emetropia. That is more 1 mm is also added there. This process of changes occurring in the refractive elements of the anterior segment and the axial length of the eye, leading to the changes in the overall refractive status of the eye from the birth onwards, is known as emetropization. So basically it is a whole journey, I can say, of emetropization that starts from the moment the baby takes birth till 6 or 7 years of life. The moment the baby is born, he or she was hypermetropic, the axial length was also less, and the cornea was steep, anterior chamber was shallow. But from the same day, there is a journey. One step starts towards that emetropization, and slowly and gradually it reaches to 23 mm at 3 years of age, and still it covers 1 mm there. The lens is also increasing its curvature so that we can compensate for that decrease in the power, and ultimately the power becomes normal, and now we don't have more of hypermetropia, and ultimately the baby becomes emetropic. So this process is called as emetropization. All right. Now after you have understood the emetropia, now let us see the ametropia. What is this ametropia? See, the word A means abnormal here. A means the abnormal. So the condition in which the parallel rays of light coming from infinity with accommodation at rest are not focusing on the retina. So it is E versus A. E was normal and A is abnormal. So A means the rays are not coming to the point focus on the retina. So they can be in front of retina. Suppose this is your retina. Okay, so rays can be coming to the focus in front of the retina, they can be coming to the focus behind the retina. Either way, it's not normal. It can be myopia in front, it can be hypermetropia behind, but it is not emetropia. So that is called as ametropia, right? And it can be due to one or more of the following conditions. So important thing, what are the different causes of the refractive errors? So let us try to see what are the important causes of the refractive errors. So first thing is your axial ametropia. Axial ametropia means that the ametropia, the refractive error, which is occurring due to the changes in the axial length. When we do not have the perfect axial length, in that condition also the refractive error will be there. So abnormal length of the globe, it can be too long also. Too long will be in myopia. It can be too short also. Too short will be in hypermetropia. And the ratio is 1:3. It is very, very important to remember here that the ratio is 1:3. The change in 1 mm of axial length will cause the change in the refractive status by 3 diopters. So 1 mm elongation will cause 3 diopter of myopia, while the 1 mm shortening will cause 3 diopters of hypermetropia. So just remember 1:3 and you can easily remember this. Now the second thing is the curvature of the refractive surfaces. This is called as the curvature emmetropia. Apart from the axial length, if there is any other thing which grossly affects the refractive status of the person, is also the curvature of the refractive surfaces. Now you know that the refractive surfaces are two. We have got cornea also and we have got lens also, and because you have got two refractive surfaces, both curvature are important, because most of the time we have this confusion in our mind that only corneal curvature will affect. No, because refractive surfaces is lens also, and in some circumstances I will say that the retinal curvature also, because ultimately the image has to be formed on retina. So let's see the curvature emmetropia. It is the abnormal curvature of the refractive surfaces of the cornea or lens. If I have an abnormal curvature of the refracting surfaces, okay, it can be too strong a curvature in myopia. It can be very, very strong in cases of myopia, or it can be too weak in hypermetropia. Now here the ratio is 1:6. Here the ratio is 1:6. So if I am having a change, 1 mm change in the radius of curvature of the cornea, then that is producing a 6 diopter change. So if it is 1 mm shortening, this will lead to 6 diopters of steepening, then this will lead to the 6 diopters of myopia, because increase in the curvature will cause increase in the power, and therefore the rays are focused much before. So if a person is having, suppose, 1 mm steepening, if the person is having 1 mm steepening, then this will cause 6 diopters of myopia. Similarly, if I have decrease in the curvature, so if I have 1 mm flattening, okay, if I have 1 mm flattening, then this will cause 6 diopters of the hypermetropia. So I think 1:3 for axial length and 1:6 for this curvature you have understood. Now the third important thing is your index emmetropia. Index means the abnormal refractive index. So even the refractive index is also affecting the final refraction. So let's see that in cases of index myopia. In cases of index myopia, the refractive index of the cornea, the aqueous or the lens, okay, it is too high, and that of the vitreous may be too low, as in vitrectomized eye with the silicone oil in the vitreous cavity. Index myopia. Now there is a very good example of index myopia if you remember the nuclear cataract. Nuclear cataract or the nuclear sclerosis. In the nuclear cataract or the nuclear sclerosis, what happens? There is a hardening of the nucleus. So due to the hardening, there was increase in the refractive index. More refractive index means more power, and therefore it will shift the refractive status towards the myopia. Similarly, those conditions which are leading to decrease in the refractive index, they will shift the refractive status towards the hypermetropia. So see, in cases of the index hypermetropia, the opposite conditions are operative, and the error is high when the lens is absent, as in cases of aphakia, or the absence of the lens from the pupillary plane. So whenever you have got less of the refracting surfaces, suppose a patient is there who is having aphakia, we do not have the lens. So if I do not have lens, the power will reduce, yes or no? Because what was the total power? The total power is your plus 60 diopters. Now out of this plus 60 diopters, cornea is 43 to 45 diopter, and the lens is your 15 to 17 diopter. It is 15 to 17 diopter. So if there is absence of the lens, that means what is happening? If there is absence of lens, then 17 diopters will be less of the refraction, and therefore what will happen? The patient will become hypermetropic. So if there is an increase in the refractive index, there is a hardening of the nucleus, the power was increased. Now when this power is increased, the rays will be focused earlier. So in that condition, the patient is becoming myopic. But in cases of hypermetropia, where I was having the absence of the lens, even if the lens is present but it is not present in the pupillary plane, then it is also as good as aphakia. So there also you will have decreased refractive index, and there you will have the refractive status hypermetropia. Then coming to the abnormal position of the lens, even in cases of the subluxation, or we have displacement of the lens, we have ectopia lentis, if the lens is not lying in its normal position, in those conditions also there will be a shift in the refractive status. Displacement forward causes the myopia and displacement backward causes the hypermetropia. Now what is this rule? See, if it is going forward, obviously then it will focus the rays more anteriorly, because lens is shifted anteriorly, and whenever the rays are focusing anterior to the retina, then this is called as myopia. Similarly, if the lens is going posteriorly, then the rays are also focusing more posteriorly, because wherever the power is, the rays are focusing there only. So if the lens is going backward, the focusing will also be backward, and therefore that will be hypermetropia. So I think all these factors are very, very clear. Now of all these factors, they are directly telling you, see, this is an important point, they are telling you that the axial length of the globe is perhaps the most important. Now I don't know what is the meaning of perhaps, but Parsons is saying that axial length is the most important factor for determining the refractive status. Okay. Now emmetropic eyes may differ in the length as much as 1 to 2 mm. 1 to 2 mm, and the radius of curvature of the cornea may vary from 7 to 8 mm. So when we say that there are so many variables which is actually determining the refractive status of the eye, this does not mean that emmetropic eye means strictly one value. No. So they are saying that emmetropic eyes may also vary about 1 to 2 mm. Even the radius of curvature of the cornea can also vary 7 to 8 mm. Emmetropia therefore results from integration of all the variables mentioned earlier, and a deviation in one factor is often compensated by the opposite tendency in another. So what they are saying, that emmetropia does not mean that all the variables should be perfect. You can have slight variation in one or two variables, but if there is one variable which is deviated, the other variable will have an opposite tendency and it will compensate, and that is why the person is emmetropic. So don't keep that notion in mind that if I have emmetropia in the person, then I will have perfect axial length, perfect radius of curvature, perfect refractive index, and all the other factors. You may have deviation of one or more factors, but yes, that will be compensated by the other variable. Alright, statistically its incidence is expected to result from the Gaussian frequency curve, but since the full development of emmetropia is never present normally at birth, the curve will have a skew deviation. So they can ask you that this Gaussian frequency curve, this will show a skew deviation because no one is emmetropic at the time of birth. Most infants are born hypermetropic. Almost inevitably, some cases will fail to reach the emmetropia and remain hypermetropic. Other will proceed too far and become myopic. Now again, this is the journey of emmetropization, and as I always say that the journeys are not always perfect. So some can fall short. So if there is under correction of this hypermetropia and this eye falls short of reaching the emmetropia, this person will become hypermetropic. Similarly, there can be overgrowth also, and this may go forward also. So in those cases, the eye is actually getting overcorrected, and due to the overcorrection, the eye may become myopic. That will be too long. Okay, of these, the former cases are by far the more numerous. So more numerous ones are what? That they are remaining hypermetropic, that is more numerous. Okay, most cases of low emmetropia, including the myopia, are merely the biological variance around a mean and cannot be regarded as a pathological one. and they cannot be regarded as pathological. So mostly what you are getting is the simple refractive errors. Mostly we do not get the pathological variants. Pathological variants means when you have got overstretching, like we get in high myopia. So usually what we are getting is the simple refractive errors, which are just the biological variants. So in this section, we have tried to cover the near vision, the emmetropization, what is the difference between the emmetropia and ametropia. We have concerned about the different factors which are actually responsible for the refractive errors, which is most important, and we have a general overview over the dictums for the correction of refractive errors. So in the next section, we will be dealing the refractive errors at large from this Parsons, and please try to read Parsons along with me. I have tried to compile this Parsons only for you people so that you can read this Pearl book, Parsons from Ophthalmology. Thank you and happy ophthalmology.